Better Preach, Episode 105, Speaking Out Against Racism with Gloria Purvis. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a Catholic speaker who specializes in parish missions and parish retreats, and I'm so excited to join you on your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. In the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's death a few years ago, the conversation in the church and America turned swiftly to race. And as often is the case, those national conversations make their way into, and then a few years later out of, our lives. Today, I'd like to send that email again, so to speak, and bring that conversation back to the top of your inbox. The discussion about race is an important one, not just for Americans at large, but for Catholics in the U.S. as well. My family, as you know, is multiracial. My youngest son is African American. And living in the Twin Cities through George Floyd and the riots that followed, this question of racism and its effects has been top of mind since. In fact, the overlap of racial justice and poverty has been the context for the works of mercy God has invited my family into since 2020 here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And along the way, I started listening to Gloria Purvis's podcast, who I'm excited and honored to interview. Her podcast and writing has been a wonderful education on what it means to be Black and Catholic in the U.S. today. I encourage you to check out her podcast if you haven't yet. 10 out of 10 recommend. Gloria Purvis is an author, commentator, and the host and executive producer of the Gloria Purvis Podcast. Through her media presence, she has always been a strong Catholic voice for life issues, religious liberty, and racial justice. Buckle up, folks. This is a really important conversation, and I'm so excited for you to listen. And as always, right before we begin, please be sure to stop by and say hi on Instagram at Better Preach. Let's get into it. Gloria Purvis, welcome to the Better Preach podcast. I'm so glad that you're here today.
Ryan, I'm so happy to be here too. Thank you for the invitation to come and talk with you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I've been wanting to sit down with you for a couple of years, actually, ever since I started the podcast. And it was really the talk last year that you gave at the National Eucharistic Congress that got my attention. I said, I have to do this. And you gave what I thought was one of the most memorable talks at the Eucharistic Congress last July. You affirmed many signs of unity in the church, but you also talked about particular signs of disunity in the church, disunity around the late Pope Francis, the kind of growing idolatry of politics over and above faith, and then finally the disunity of racism. How did this talk originate for this event, and what was it like to give it's a hard word, to such a big crowd of people?
I don't know why I was asked to come, but I know the invitation did come, and I said yes because I have a deep love of the Eucharist, and I know it's an area where there's a struggle about belief in the real presence. So anything that I could do to aid in that, spreading the belief in the real presence, and also making people realize we're one human family under God, I wanted to do that. And let's say, it's interesting to use the hard word because I was praying so much, especially once we got to Indianapolis and the day of and then the hour before. And when I say praying, I mean really. Yeah. Every priest I would run into, I was like, I'm speaking. I want you to give me your blessing. I didn't even know them, but they were like happy to do it. And, honestly, I didn't have anything prepared until I walked up to the podium.
Wait a minute. Is that true?
Yeah. I didn't know what I was going to talk about.
Holy moly.
Well, see, because I've been speaking for like a really long time, I've discovered that I could prepare something and the Lord put something completely different in my mind to say. I do have a lot of trust that the Lord will tell me what He wants said. And also if he decides I should look foolish, that I will accept that. And so that was my approach. I'd been praying, what do you want said? What do you want said? And he was putting some things in my mind. And as I was going up to the microphone, I was saying to him, you sure you want me to say that? That's going to be kind of hard.
Yeah.
Then you sure? I mean, people are so joyous here.
Yeah.
And it was kind of quiet in response. I was like, even pretty much like I said what I said.
Yes.
And so I did. And I fully anticipated that it'd be a hard word to hear about disunity. I had seen a lot of the complaints in social media from certain Catholics, and that only a certain flavor of Catholics were invited to this, and so on and so forth. And to talk about disunity to a group of people that perhaps may think don't have any of these issues or challenges,
right,
could also be difficult. But it was what the Lord put in my mind, on my heart, and on my lips. I just stepped out and said it. And particularly to talk about the sin of racism is a really, unfortunately, touchy subject in our culture.
Yeah.
And it should not be one in our church, though, because we're talking about sin. And if anything, the church is in the soul-saving business. And so we should be talking about sin because we can go to hell for it.
Yeah.
And to let people know it is a sign of disunity. Hopefully it gave them something to pray about, and if necessary, to begin the path to conversion in that area.
That's remarkable, but I know that it stems from your heart and how prayerful and willing you are to be led by the Spirit. Now, hearing you say that, there was this beautiful juxtaposition of truth wrapped up in love, and that's how it ultimately came across. That could still be a hard word. But what sort of response did it generate, afterwards, or even in the next couple of days? What did you hear from folks? And did any of the responses surprise you?
I tend to duck and run generally after I speak. I am very worried about the concept of Catholic celebrity, and I think it's nothing more than a temptation from the evil one.
Yeah.
So I typically try to duck and run after I speak. But in that case where I was caught, for lack of a better word, by people, they seemed very moved by what was said.
Yeah.
And I would say I saw a desire for a closeness with God. No one specifically talked to me about the particular points at that time, but they let me know that they were really moved. And then someone let me know that it has been a source of, how should I say this? Like in the difficulty that's going on, it was a source of respite, I guess, and just encouragement as well, that was surprising to me. But I will say what also was surprising is after the event, the kind of people that will say they're Catholic and then say the bishops made a mistake having you come speak. You talk about race and blah, 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 blah. And so that's unfortunate. Yeah. And it's also unfortunate that they would say the bishops made a mistake because, I mean, they had a number of us, and it's just unnecessary. So sometimes the unnecessary cruelty of my fellow co-religionists can be surprising. And also that it seems like on social media, people will be emboldened to say really just things that are not becoming of a believer in God. And especially a believer in God that puts on that bio profile that they are this faithful, devout, all those things.
Sure.
And so, that to me, I can never not be surprised when the kinds of things that I've experienced come from people that self-identify that way. But it also just goes to show how much more we need voices in the church to talk about these difficult issues. I do think the Lord has a sense of humor and a plan about everything, because for that section of the church, being pro-life and all those things are really important. And so I see within God's plan, that's why when I was first introduced to the national stage, it was really in defense of our beliefs around the dignity of the human person in the womb, around the dignity of woman, sex, all those things.
That's right. So
for that section of the Catholic Church in the U.S., they thought I was this great, wonderful, orthodox, blah, blah, blah. And then to see me be vocal about the sin of racism and the necessity of racial justice seem to be a disconnect for them. But for me, it's just a logical
Right.
continuation of what the church teaches about the human person. That was the beginning of seeing, at least for me, the partisanship that has infected the church.
Yeah.
So much so that people will look at their political leaders for guidance rather than the catechism
Yeah.
or any of the doctors of the church or the great writers of the church to see, what does the Lord say on this? What should be my disposition?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately as well, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and also some coming from other Catholics who are public speakers. And, it's just unfortunate.
It's almost like we realize that the goalposts that so many people are aiming at are partisan goalposts and not, say, catechism goalposts.
Right.
And
Right.
that has been a jarring effect, I think, for many. I can imagine that respite, and that's what I experienced. I'm not someone who is vocal out on social media and in some of those places. I've had a few moments here or there. But generally speaking, I don't play that card out there in public. Perhaps I should. But nonetheless,
don't.
And part of it is weighing a call and what is God inviting me to do, and what do I have energy and passion for. But that said, there's a lot of folks who watch the conversation online, and I'm one of those who I watch the conversation, and I felt encouraged and affirmed, and that I thought, I'm not crazy. This disunity in the three ways that you mentioned. Really resonated. And I imagine that's what a lot of folks experienced, this permission to go, gosh, it's a breath of fresh air to bring the light of the church's teaching on these delicate areas. So I'm really grateful for that. And the truth is, as you started to allude to, this isn't your first rodeo. You've been doing this for a long time, a national speaker, acclaimed radio host. You've been a sought-after voice in the church for years. And since George Floyd's murder, and that's very particular to us around here in the Twin Cities. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. Of course, George Floyd and all of that happened just across the river, 10 miles away or so. But since his murder, you've become, in my estimation, one of the most visible and vocal Catholic proponents for racial justice in the U.S. generally and in the church particularly. How did this mantle unfold for you, this kind of prophetic mantle since then, 2020?
Other than just being firm about what the church teaches, and at the time having a radio show that people listen to, and we would talk about the news of the day. And so it was before George Floyd, it was Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, who had been jogging and was murdered. Then it was Breonna Taylor, where no-knock warrant police came in and shot her. And then the culmination of it was George Floyd, because we had video of what happened. I mean, later on, the Ahmaud Arbery video came out. But what made this different with George Floyd is the video of police doing this to a citizen. Police who have been legally entrusted with a power, right, to serve and protect. And what we saw on video was the opposite of that. And what we also saw on video was a confirmation of what Black people have been talking about for more than 100 years. We've talked about police brutality for a long time, and it seems like people were not able, for some reason, to believe it, despite story after story, even court cases, right? This was so, you saw the whole torturous thing of it. Right. And so this really brought it to a head because it was such a visceral moment of a time in the U.S. And I also think the Black community, it was traumatizing, to be honest with you, to watch it. I wish some parts of it I'd never seen, especially when he was calling out to his mother as he was dying. And just the callousness of the police officer toward his life, even though the crowd was, begging him, please get off him, stop. I have said before, and I'll say this here, to me, it felt like watching an abortion take place and being powerless to do anything about it.
Wow.
It was the same kind of, to me, horror, helplessness, anger, and just then desire to, Lord, how can we make this better? So, that's sort of how it unfolded, I think, of having these conversations. And also, unfortunately, in some cases, the conversations with my colleagues were quite hostile. Like, they were quite hostile about talking about racial justice. And that also is when I began to see how politics was influencing even the best of us, so to speak.
Yeah.
Even though I was outnumbered, I will never back down if what I'm saying I believe is true. And if you ask me questions about it, I will be able to explain it. But I also wanted to understand their point of view, you know, and ask questions. And that, I think, caused, for some people, a lot of discomfort. So I think from that and standing my ground, I think more and more people had come to know me in this regard. And then I had received a lot of requests for interviews, right? To do interviews with various media outlets, even Mormons. No, not Mormons, the Seventh-day Adventists, I think they were.
Yeah.
So just a number of places. So that's how it unfolded, not out of any grand plan that I had.
Yeah.
I think just the accidental witness, you know, I had no intentions other than to be faithful to the Lord. And from that, it seemed to just, a lot of people somehow took notice.
That's right. Yeah, there was just a certain faithfulness to continue sharing your experience and what the church teaches. And this uncomfortable reality, again, that there's the goalposts seem to have shifted.
Yeah.
I think your voice has been a bit of a guide for me as a father of a Black son, and myself and my wife, who have befriended many folks in the African American community here in the Twin Cities, really as a result of the fallout from George Floyd. It wasn't so much along racial justice lines, although that was there. Part of it was there was an interruption in life in those communities impacted by the subsequent riots.
Yeah.
And there was some food insecurity that emerged, and that was real. And so we sort of went in that way and began building relationships both in Minneapolis and here on the east side in St. Paul. And so much of what our life and the call on our life, a certain focus on the works of mercy, particularly in a poor Black urban setting, came out of that season. And your podcast in particular has just been so helpful to help shape my mind around the experience of what it means to be Black in America today.
Yeah.
And so I just want to thank you.
Glory to God.
You have been, I'm sure there are countless listeners who don't get to thank you publicly, and I'm so grateful to be able to do that because it's been such an important piece for me, and which has gotten my wife and I since then reflecting on the experience of Catholicism and Black people in the U.S.
Yeah.
And we started to learn that there's a story there. To that end, could you share a brief history of Black Catholics in the United States?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so, you know, the interesting thing, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm sure maybe some of your listeners remember learning about the Stono River Rebellion before there was the United States, when South Carolina was a colony.
Yes.
And the people who were kidnapped and enslaved, and then later had the Stono River uprising to throw off slavery and try to seek freedom, were actually Catholics from the Congo. And what people don't realize is how Marian their whole movement was.
Wow.
They consecrated themselves on the Feast of the Blessed Mother before then striking out in search of freedom and trying to resist, even by violent means, the unjust oppression they were experiencing through slavery.
Right.
So if we think about that, you know, Black people from the earliest times in the United States, even as Catholics originally from another country, have had to struggle to be recognized as human beings worthy of dignity and respect. I would say it continued because we have found that religious communities, including sisters and brothers and priests, owned human persons. Some of our bishops owned human persons. It's a tough thing to hear. It's a tough thing to deal with. And it's also tough to see how it has impacted the church even until today. So post-slavery, you would think that the church would have reached out to the newly free African Americans, and the church did not.
Yeah.
And when you read about some of the bishops' response, some of, well, how am I supposed to service them and my current people I have to serve? Like, are they not any good, the people I have to serve? So just sort of this, I would say, dishonesty around being able to serve the African American community. And so because of that, there's so many people that never were exposed to the church. Then you had people like Daniel Rudd, come along, who pretty much founded the National Black Catholic Congress with Venerable Augustus Tolton and all those people.
Yes.
They were the ones that go out and evangelize their own community.
Yep.
So you had other Black Catholics going out and evangelizing other Black people about the Catholic Church, what she believes. And to say, one of the things that Daniel Rudd would say is give her a fair hearing. Notice he didn't say how they act, rather than how the church believes. And what she says about the human person is so beautiful.
Yeah.
What she says about our relationship with God, that intimacy that we can have in the Eucharist, and also the intimacy that we can have in the Sacrament of Reconciliation, I just think is so beautiful. And so it was sort of not the institutional church going after and trying to share the message with Black people. It was other Black Catholics. And some people were already Catholic after slavery and just held on to that. For example, which is to me remarkable, the 272 persons that were sold into slavery in Louisiana by Georgetown University, a lot of their descendants are still Catholic. And so we have held on, I would say, to the truths of the faith, despite how we've been treated by our co-religionists. It's sad to think about the fact that no seminary in the United States would receive a Black man as a priest. In fact, Venerable Augustus Tolton had to leave the United States to be educated and become a priest. You had religious sisters, their communities were never integrated. So you'd have the Oblate Sisters of Providence, who was started by servant of God, Mary Lang. Then you have the Sisters of the Holy Family out of Notre Dame, started by Venerable Henriette DeLille. And what you saw was a continuation of secular behaviors within the Catholic Church. And it's sad. It's horrible. Then you see one of the first African-American bishops, when he was made a bishop, people out there protesting, saying, God did not choose Black apostles, or, all these other kind of things, just openly, right? I will say this, it is, I think, the only thing that has kept us in the church is really a true belief in God and his promises and about who we are. And even if you look at some of the abolitionist material that had come out from other Black people, it is heavily God-focused. I mean, from the earliest times. I mean, if people read David Walker's Appeal, which was considered quite radical, he's not Catholic, but it talks about the hypocrisy of Christians in this regard. And so I think we, frankly, still remain a mirror for the church in the United States. I would say we also are, I should hope, call people to conscience, like to feel something like we can't do this. We should be influencing the world. The practices of the world should not be influencing the church. So the fact that you would have within parishes where Black people were allowed to attend segregated seating. Black people could not receive the sacrament of the Eucharist until every white person did. And if they ran out of the Eucharist, they would just fresh out. Not being able to participate in days of recollection because of rules of segregation, all of the things. And so the question should be, why are we still Catholic?
Right.
Considering this behavior. And the only thing I could say is really God's grace being poured out on us, and this deep belief that what the church says, what God says, what God's promises are true.
Yeah.
And so what you will see if you look at the history of Black Catholics in the United States, and the late Father Cyprian Davis wrote the seminal work, Black Catholics in the United States, it's really something to read. And let me just give this little story.
Please.
People might not know something called the Red Summer of 1919, but it was a time when there was racial violence breaking out all over the United States. They would call them sometimes massacres, like the Elaine Massacre. They can look these things up.
Sure.
It also happened in Chicago, and it caught the attention of the Pope. It was so bad, like what was going on. And so the Pope reached out to the bishop and said, you all need to talk about this at your next bishop's meeting. You must. And so they said, sure, we will. And they didn't. They didn't address it at all. And I think those failures time and again have left Catholics misinformed about their real identity. Oftentimes people conflate being white with being Catholic. So when they encounter those of us who are not white but are Catholic, it is odd for them, especially if our way of worship might be a little bit more lively than they might anticipate.
Yeah.
So instead of seeing it as a cultural expression unique to our community, I've seen people demean the way in which we worship by saying, oh, it's too emotional or this and that and the other. And I was like, oh, but David got excited and was jumping and clapping and singing outside the temple. So what is wrong with our community, for those of us that worship in this way, to clap our hands or to call out or these things that might not be experienced by other communities? So even there, they have a myopic vision of what it is to be Catholic, what it is to worship as a Catholic. And instead of, when they encounter it, being like, oh, wow, look at the way in which this community loves the Lord, it has been one of disgust, one of there's something wrong with you. And it just goes hand in hand with the brokenness of racism, that anything that originates from the Black community is seen as less than or substandard, or in some cases, even lacking virtue. And it's a real stain on the church in the United States.
Reading Cyprian Davis's book was a really important step for my family and I, and brought me into very much of what you described, this really uncomfortable history that I wasn't aware of. I would have made some assumptions that the church had done better in Reconstruction, let's say,
Right.
That the church would have done better in the 20th century. Right. And there were bright points, and there were other leaders, we could speak about some, who have been strong voices along the civil rights movement and so on outside of the Black community.
Yeah, Hesburgh, I think, got a Notre Dame, right? The Holy Cross.
That's right. And our mutual friend, Don Eden Goldstein, is also writing a book about Father Toomey and his role in the civil rights movement. And so there have been these sort of bright spots, but the history is painful and difficult. And yet some of these bright spots, I'm going to jump to this question, is on the progress of the canonization of the first African-American saint. And to note, I was just in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where Sister Thea Bowman was for a time. And they have a beautiful kind of memorial to her and a lot of artifacts from her life and other things. Could you share the story of those potential saints within the Black Catholic Church in the U.S.? Who do we think might cross the finish line first?
That's a good question. Believe it or not, it takes quite a bit of investment for someone to be investigated and to have someone that stays the course and making sure all the right information gets to Rome. Yeah. And that there are people to interview and things like that. I don't know who will go first. Sometimes I wonder if it's going to be Julia Greeley, Julia's little red wagon and her devotion to the Sacred Heart, and also her perseverance in the face of just terrible racism at the time. Yeah. Her charity was such as she gave to those who needed it, and white families were embarrassed to receive help from a Black woman, so she would go at night and to give them aid rather than subject them to the attitudes of the time. Wow. She was just an amazing woman, and even by the time of her death, she had quite a huge turnout of the entire community for her. And so I'm wondering if Julia Greeley, because also so many people don't know about her, if she might cross the finish line first. But who knows? So maybe we'll have multiple at once. You just never know. And I'm hoping now that we have a Pope that's from the United States who also himself has Black ancestry, African ancestry, that it will make people consider the blessings that are within the Black community. And it does make me wonder if the church had been more receptive to these of her children, how many more priests, how many more bishops, how many more religious sisters we'd have, how many more Catholics we would have. So I'm hoping people will sit to think about that, right? Yeah. Because I just think right now there's a poverty in the church with regard to even serving the Black community.
Right, because the example of the saints is After the Bible and the Catechism, magisterial teaching, it's the lives of the saints that show us the way. And it's been so beautiful learning more about married, as a married person, married saints. And because it always seemed like there was this grand disconnect between the lives of these capital S saints and these lives that they were living and where I am today. And this is what we need. Just to note, I want to put their causes and links to their information, those who are on the way. I'll put that in the show notes for folks to check it out. And because each of them is worth getting to know and building a relationship with and praying for.
Yes.
Back to some of the speaking pieces. I see you as a bold and fearless speaker. I wonder if there are any mentors or kind of heroes for you that you've looked up to that inspire you to keep going and to speak out boldly.
I love the martyrs of Compiègne, the Carmelite community, Carmelite sisters that were beheaded during the French Revolution because they stayed faithful to the church, to God at a time when France was pretty much losing its mind. Their story of fidelity just grounds me. I feel like I have a very close relationship with now they're saints, the martyrs of Compiègne. I feel a very close relationship with them in reading about their life. And, they had human emotions like the rest of us, I remember one religious sister was talking to a priest and she was like, Father, don't even, don't bring it up, the kind of things that, the difficulty that they understood that they were going to have.
Yeah.
And even before the whole community sacrificed themselves, decades before, one of the infirm sisters had a vision that the community was going to do some great act of love for God. And so when the time had come and they were thinking about what are we going to do, they recognized that there may be this opportunity to offer themselves in some way for the service of God. And it came to pass that the way in which they were able to offer service to God was to give their life and fidelity to Him, and giving such a bold witness to the bloodthirsty crowd that was so awful that the animals that would pull the condemned into the air would only go so far. They wouldn't go all the way up into the crowd because of frankly, I would say, if you read the descriptions, bloodthirsty demonic presence there. And here these sisters go in fully habited, which was illegal at the time. And it was only through coincidence they were arrested while they had been washing their secular clothes. So they had nothing else to wear but their habits.
Wow.
And they went in singing these beautiful Latin hymns that, again, also that had been outlawed. So to see these women coming in, proclaiming God in a full habit, and one by one going up the steps of the guillotine and singing all the while until you just hear one last voice singing. And she goes up and guillotined. I find them to be the model of love. I'm getting all choked up talking about them. I find them to be such a great model of love that even amidst when things that they counted on in the social order were gone, that they still held firm to God. They still held firm to Him despite the, knowing that they were going to lose their lives and lose it in a way that, I would be afraid to be beheaded. And I don't know how I'd be able to keep it together after women that I'm very close to are beheaded right there in front of me, and their bodies and their head is right there. And yet they persevered amidst all that horror and just fell in love with the Lord. One quick little story, like one of the elderly sisters, as they were riding in the cart and it got to where they were supposed to be, a soldier snatched her and threw her down. So she landed head first on the ground. And it looked like they thought she might have died. But she had come to, and she sort of she was just thankful that she wasn't robbed of the opportunity to go to the guillotine, which, who has that attitude, right? So to me, they have been, although they weren't necessarily speakers, you know what I mean?
Yep, sure.
They had a great public witness.
That's right.
And within a week of their being beheaded, the guillotine was no more.
What do you mean?
So within a week of the sisters being beheaded, the whole guillotine and that whole process was done.
Oh, is that
like
right?
The very people, one of the people that had condemned them, he himself was subject to the guillotine before the week was out.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know that history.
Oh yeah, there was a beautiful love conquered the demon.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah.
What a fine point at the end of that story.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of St. Ignatius's degrees of humility. The first one is to prefer God's law over sin. The second is sort of to seek poverty literally and spiritually. But then finally is to seek the imitation of Christ on the cross. Mm-hmm. And the speaker who was sharing about these degrees of humility, of course, used Maximilian Kolbe as an example of that third concept. But this is another great example. That was an imitation of Christ on the cross.
Yes.
Jesus walked towards the cross, and he was full of love through the whole thing, even forgiving others and bringing others into the kingdom. And St. Ignatius of Antioch, just can't wait to get there, to Rome, to be devoured by the lions. And what a beautiful witness. It reminds me, too, of Pope Leo's first homily. Talked about that level of humility for the cardinals specifically, but presumably, all leadership in the church, a certain cruciform humility.
There's so many people whose lives are such examples of love, a witness to love amidst such great turmoil and danger to themselves. Those people inspire me. I'm very much inspired by the martyrs.
Yes.
I hope to have that courage.
Amen. It comes through you, and it has been inspiring to me for so long. As we kind of wrap up, I'm thinking about the deacons and the priests and perhaps even bishops who might listen to this podcast, and they have the charge of preaching the Word of God each day of the week and certainly on Sundays. And yet we very rarely hear about the issue of racism, and even less so the issue of racial justice from the pulpit. If you had an opportunity to speak to a group of Catholic priests on preaching on racial justice in the pulpit, what direction, correction even, or encouragement would you give them?
Well, I would remind them why they became priests. First and foremost, why did you become priests, right? You became priests because you wanted to serve the Lord and spread the truth and help people get to heaven. Well, I want to let you know that this is what I say to them. A lot of your sheep are in danger of losing their soul because of the sin of racism. How are you, as a shepherd, protecting your sheep in this regard? If you love them, speak the truth. If you love them, help them navigate the current movements, right? Help them navigate all the misinformation. If you love them, you yourself should become educated about the history of the Black experience, not only in the Catholic Church, but in the United States. When you start to understand the deep, great, long-term evil in this country, it will make you shiver.
Yeah.
And you should want to, out of love for God, because sin is chiefly an offense against God, out of love for God, you should want to make repair for these sins, and you should want to help the people who the Lord has put in your care to actually be cared for. So where needed, you need to yourself become educated and begin that path of conversion as well. Do you love all your sheep? That's the question. Do you love them? And do you recognize the great hold that the enemy has on the human person through the sin of racism? And so much more work needs to be done. I also would beg them that in the seminary that these men are taught the history of Black people, particularly the history of the descendants of the enslaved, because our experience is unique, even unique from Black immigrants that come over.
That's right.
Our experience is unique when they start to learn about redlining, when you start to learn about Jim Crow, when you start to learn about the states that in their constitution talked about we have to make sure that the Black person is always subjugated so that the white person can be on top. I mean, to hear and learn these things and to see it playing out even today in some of the coded language that we see among our political leaders, or even the kinds of signs that they're doing by reinstalling memorials to Confederate soldiers.
That's right.
It gives a message, right? It's about that lost cause mythology that the South put out to say they had a noble cause and they were great people. And you see this with the sort of some of these Catholics canonizing Robert E. Lee, the general, to even know the tactics of the enemy and to be able to recognize it and stop it would be a great thing. So those would be the things that I would say. And they need to make sure they have the proper formation in the seminary. They need to make sure that the seminarians have the proper assignments. I mean, you don't have to send a seminarian to another country to learn another language to serve a different community. Send them over to the Black community. Have them going door to door, inviting people to church, inviting people to activities at the parish. Just the human thing that you would do. We need to do that to the Black community. And in particular in the South, where oftentimes in some states, in terms of communities of color, the Black communities are the majority, but receive little to no attention from the local diocese. That to me is shameful. And I do believe these bishops will be judged for that. I really do. And so they need to be able to overcome within their own diocese the resistance to reaching out and evangelizing within the Black community.
I don't know if you'll have I don't know if you've had an opportunity to give that talk. Perhaps somebody listening right now would want to invite you to give that talk to a group of priests or seminarians or otherwise. There's a lack of moral formation, clearly. And then there's a moral malformation that has happened as well that needs to be corrected. And thank you so much for your experience and wisdom and seeing how it's played out around preaching. I have two last things. One would be, are there books? We mentioned the history of Black Catholics in the U.S., Father Cyprian Davis's book. I'll put that in the show notes. Is there another book, let's say, that comes to mind or documentary, if people wanted to learn a little bit more about the history of Black Catholics in the U.S.?
I think people need to know a greater history about Black people in general. And so I would suggest Slavery by Another Name. I know it won a Pulitzer. It also, PBS did a documentary on it.
Okay.
And it talks about the response of the white community after slavery was abolished. And I think people would be appalled to learn about the purposeful, oftentimes violent resistance to the liberation of Black people. And in fact, instead of seeing this liberation as a good thing, they saw it as a violation of their own liberty.
That's right.
And so people could read Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman.
Okay.
Also, if they could watch Eyes on the Prize, that series is really, it's old, but it's great in terms of giving more visual and testimony to what was happening during the Civil Rights Movement, and also to see the behavior of the people that opposed it.
Yeah.
Another one is called When Affirmative Action Was White. It will unmask for people, the real history about who received affirmative action. That is this particular kind of help from the U.S. government. And I think it's good for people to read that. And that's by Ira Katz Nelson. Just entry-level primers to history of what has happened, not just within the Black Catholic community, but the Black community as a whole, because it does affect the Black Catholic community.
Absolutely.
And I hope it empowers more priests to be able to preach about it, right? Because we know that that's something, according to Pew Research, Black Christians, including Catholics, find hearing about racism very important for them on Sunday. And the fact that we have so little of it in the church, they have to recognize they're not feeding their sheep, and also that some sheep leave. I spent a lot of time during the George Floyd years of trying to talk people to stay into the church. Why? Because of the explicit hostility they experienced from people in their parish toward issues of racial justice around Black people, and even hearing it from the pulpit, from the AMBO. It's exceptionally painful. So people need to learn. I think it'll help them.
I love those resources. I'll note those in the show notes as well. If folks want to get connected with you and learn more and hear more from you, your podcast is certainly one place. Where else might you send them?
I'll probably be doing some writing for Georgetown University in a little bit, and also for Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island. And just look out for anything that I might have in whatever medium that I share on social media. My podcast is on pause right now because I've been so busy, but hopefully we can start up a third season and I could turn people to that. But if they've never listened to it, please go listen to the podcast.
The back
and you could
episodes
also
would be
reach
great.
out. You can also reach out to me through America, and they will get your messages to me. And that's the main thing.
That's great. Gloria, thank you so much for being here. It's been an honor and a privilege and a joy to connect with you, to learn from you today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. And I pray intently for all the listeners that they would receive whatever God wishes them to receive from listening to this episode of your podcast.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can send me an email. I love to hear from you in that way. ryanohera.org/betterpreach. There's a little contact form right there. It sends an email right to me. You have millions of choices when you listen to podcasts. Thanks for press and play today. See you next time.